Wow, this is kind of extraordinary. Welcome to LongHouse and to Sanctuary. Louder? Okay, this is about as loud as I get. Welcome to LongHouse and to Sanctuary Entwine, my installation here. I'm incredibly excited to see this many people here today in the middle of August. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to say a few words of gratitude, and then we'll get right to the panel. I wanted to thank the sponsors who underwrote today and the next coming weeks: Alpine Bank, the Abudi and Hoffman families, Dorothy Lichtenstein, IET, Integrated Exercise Therapy, which is an extraordinary place in Bridgehampton that keeps me moving forward, and TAG Associates, and then Stephen and Sandy Pearlbinder and Rico Maresca Gallery for underwriting the installation. This is so perfect because I'm about to thank Jack Leonard Larson. When Jack invited me to do something at LongHouse, I was so honored, slightly terrified, and I really wanted to pay homage to Jack and what he's created here, and so I wanted to really emphasize the trees and pay homage to his life in textiles. So I'm very honored to have been able to do this here. I also wanted to thank Matko Tomicic and Peter Olson and Wendy Van Duzen for being so incredibly supportive. So we have this extraordinary panel here today. I'm just so pleased that you're all here, and I know you have a lot of other things going on. I'm not going to introduce anyone individually, but I just wanted to thank Michele Oka Doner, April Gornik, Uzoamaka Maduka, we're new friends, and Neda Young. I'm just really grateful. I would encourage you, maybe after the panel, if you'd like to walk around, you can get inside some of the cubes. And we will have a brief Q&A after about 40 minutes of conversation. And did I miss anything? No? Okay, thank you.
Well, welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you guys here today, and I'm really excited to get into this conversation here with some incredible artists and collectors here that we have to talk about what it means to be a woman artist today in 2017, what it's meant historically, and I think what I'm most interested by starting is maybe if each of you could introduce yourselves to the audience, talk about your work, and I think after that, I'd like to start with just talking about things that I've seen as a common thread in some of the work that you guys do and see how that might relate to the female perspective. And then maybe dovetail from there into a more general conversation about the place of women in art today and how that works just in the industry and in the studio. Want to start over here with April?
Okay, April Gornik. Can you all hear me? I have the worst voice. I've been painting landscapes, drawing, and making prints of landscapes for, like 30 years or something, and maybe longer, I hate to think. It's something that I wasn't really expecting to do because I'd started off as kind of a conceptual artist, but when I found my soul in art, I found that I was looking for places in which to cite my own sort of spiritual self. And I needed a lot of space to do that, apparently. So I ended up painting pretty large landscapes that I hope will be, for the viewer, immersive and moving. And I'm not afraid of the word beautiful. And in many cases, slightly disturbing, slightly off-putting. There's usually a little bit of an edge to them. And that's principally what I do. I show in a gallery in Chelsea regularly called Denise Corey, and I'm very pleased to be on this panel.
My name is Neda Young. I hate this, but I study art history And I started collecting art about 45 years ago. I don't know if it was called art at the time, but anyway, for me it was art. I have many women artists in my collection, and I had always time to look at the difference, what people will say, between men and women painters. And often it upset me because I think that the greatest women artists, but somehow men managed to get a little further, and maybe we'll discuss this later. But, okay, thank you for having me.
My name is Michele Oka Doner, and I come from a family of artists on my mother's side. Her father was trained classically as a fresco painter, and when he came to this country, he painted in the first Metropolitan Opera House in New York. And he had a daughter, ironically. He supported my Aunt Dorothy, who studied with Hans Hofmann and was in the first Whitney Biennial, before they called it that, in the first show at the Staybile Gallery. So as a child, I grew up with paintings and knew that I was part of this tribe. The only problem was I didn't connect to the visual. I wasn't going to be a fresco painter or an abstract expressionist. I wasn't going to weld I-beams, paint targets, or stripes. But I was from Miami Beach. I grew up in nature. I had a whole language to express, so for half a century I've made works in many shapes, forms, media that express the beauty. Again, the word beautiful, thank you for bringing it up so soon in the conversation. I love what I see here, the beauty of life, much more than relating to the irony of our contemporary world. So I've been happily and quietly subversive.
Well, I'm happy that you mentioned nature there, because that sort of goes in with my first question I had. Both you and April, I see, looking at your work, that nature is taken up obviously as a major subject, and in your case, both subject and material. And I wondered how that kind of connected with the female perspective, because there's a way in which, when I look at your guys' work, there is a sense that nature isn't something that's there to be mastered or controlled, but rather something that is to be collaborated with. There's an ease rather than this sort of rampant anxiety. And so for me, that's very different from a traditional way of encountering kind of the intensity of nature, and perhaps that might be something that distinguishes it from a more kind of, I don't know, more male or hegemonic perspective on nature. And so I was wondering if you guys might talk a little bit about what your relationship is with nature, how you take it up as a subject in your work, and whether or not you think that the way that you deal with nature has anything to do with a female perspective or no.
Classically, I think that people oftentimes think that women, for male artists, represent the other, and I've come to feel that in my work. Why is it doing that? I've come to feel that nature for me is the other somehow. I can't exactly explain why that should be, but it's something that I identify myself with. It's the furthest thing from myself, and yet somehow it ends up defining me. I wouldn't say that my work is full of peace. There is a lot of storms, and that's very deliberate. I seem to seek them out, but for me, there's a kind of truth in a sky that's half dark, half light. That's truer to me than something that's a simply sunny place. Or if there's something that is, kind of vacuous and open and light-filled, there should be a little edge of, like, this is a little too open and light-filled. And I try to work with that in my work, because to me that's more true about life and life experiences, and therefore landscape is an expression of life experience than simply painting a scene, for instance. So everything that I work with has a lot of interference from my own kind of psychic disturbances, and slash truth. But for me, definitely landscape is the other. I define myself by it in a certain way. I don't know if men would say that they define themselves by women. But for me, that there is like a certainty, I think, at this point in my long career, about knowing that nature represents something that I like. I love living here. I love being at the edge of a continent. I love being at the edge of things. I like where water and land meet. I like the specificity of that distinction. And landscape is metaphorically the furthest thing from people. If you think about it, like if you think about what defines you, if I look at another person, any of you, we're similar. We represent a kind of each other anyway. But when you look out into nature and then you put a boundary around it, you're already kind of projecting where that edge should be according to your own psychic need or preference or inclination. So that's nature for me.
Can I ask you about when you're describing that and you're talking about that sort of, it has this, kind of using the word disturbance and then also the sense of, because it's certainly true when I look at your work, there is a sense of if not danger, often there's a sense of danger there, there's a sense of suspense, there's a sense of something that you using the word disturbance really does resonate with me as a viewer of your work. And so can you maybe just talk a little bit more, like when you say that this is the other, that this is a disturbance of everything, and you seem to be somewhat at home there, and even now you're saying at this point in your career you feel very certain about your relationship to this thing that I think is traditionally something that for many people certainty is the last thing that they feel when they come into contact with.
I just meant that I feel certain about how important landscape is to me. I mean, when I first started to paint landscapes, nobody was doing that. It was just like not done, period. So it was, and I wasn't trying to be mavericky, but I ended up needing to do that to be kind of true to myself. So when I moved to New York, I'd started painting landscapes, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get killed for this, because I wanted to be in the art world. I wanted to show in galleries. I wanted to do the whole thing. So I was really afraid that I was going to damn myself by my own love of this subject matter. But then I just kind of kept going, and luckily I ended up finding at least a niche for myself in the art world doing that. But when I say disturbance too, when I'm working, I work a lot from photographs. I don't work in situ. I don't work on plein air. But when I'm working with photographs, I use Photoshop a lot. I'm looking for something that feels like familiar to me. There's something in a picture, in an image that attracted to me in the first place that I have to find, and I have to parse it somehow. And that's done in the composition and in a certain kind of tension that I try to build into the work. And it's about light and dark. It's about all sorts of dichotomies that the work is about, that I think make it rich. And then my process is very long, and so I'll start with an idea, and then as I'm painting it, it'll change and change and change and evolve, and I have to be sort of aware of. I have a kind of a distant goal in my mind, and then of course, because it's painting and because it's art, I end up either wandering away from it, kind of in an almost out of control way, an out of control intuitive way, or I end up beelining down it, and it feels like the painting just paints itself because it's so necessary to happen. So it really varies a lot. I'm sure, Michele, you've had that happen too.
Well, I've had a very different experience. I think I started in the 60s, and they didn't care what I did or what I didn't do. So there was no damning to happen. And rather than feeling excluded, I felt liberated, because I took it as a license to do what I thought and felt. It did not occur to me that I should pay attention to what the agenda was when I didn't belong to that group of people, and clearly they weren't interested in my presence. So I had a great time. And I was the first woman to go to graduate school in Ann Arbor at the university in art. I now found out, because it's their 200th birthday and it was published, that they had a quota system on women. I thought when I went there they were women friendly. It was one of the early schools to have women. Little did I know. So this wasn't so long ago, really. And they said, well, you can come, but you have to carry your own things. Like, I'm going to ask somebody to carry my things, you know? And so I put up, but I'm a good-natured person. And I was really doing what I loved and what I felt. And so I put up with a lot of stuff, but the guys were so funny. They used to say things like, come on, Michele, get with the program. You know, it'd be like crit time. And then, but what was wonderful is, maybe some of you know Cara Vanderweg, who she represents Michael Heiser at Gagosian. Her father, Phil, was one of the 6 men in my class. And in the 2 years of graduate school, we never had one conversation. That'll give you some sense of, you know, what was going on in the shop and in this, you know, it's like such a place. So 40 years goes by, and I run into Cara, and she said, you know, my father. And then he shows up in my loft one day. She brought him over. And he came and he said, how did you survive? He said, we were so brutal to you. I did not know this, by the way. And then he gave the answer himself. He said, but we were brutal to each other as well. And I knew that. I knew it was much tougher to be one of these 6 guys than to be me. So I think it also, to have to fight, and I did, I couldn't just make my things. When I graduated, I was 6 months pregnant, and they told me if they knew I was going to have a baby, children, they never would have let me into the program because the state of Michigan, even though I paid tuition, this is true. I mean, can you imagine this? So I had the brunch for the graduates because I was the only woman. It was very afterwards, and everybody did their orals and came back, and I came back, and they said, how'd it go? And I had to take public speaking. I had a sister who was a debater, and my father was a public speaker, so I've always had to speak up. And so I did something I'd never done before or since. I burst into tears. I was so frustrated. So yes, you know, the fact that they wouldn't let me defend my work, but instead got mad at me for being pregnant, that did. But otherwise, it's been a great run. I think the irritation of being in the wrong subject, nature, the wrong gender, and being the wrong in quotes, was the grain of sand in the oyster that has allowed me to put on the layers of nacre and behave like a mollusk. So I am nature. I don't see nature as that. I've lived in a hierarchical, you can pronounce that better than I can, situation, where there's been men, women, and plants. And so I've actually more known for my work with the ocean, but I've also gone to defend plant life, too.
And that kind of brings you to something that Neda and I were talking about, which is, the whole theme of these talks has been women artists. And I know I talked with Neda and also a bit with Toni about how one sees oneself as an artist. I think that there are some people who don't want to have that label of a woman artist, and certainly for me, if I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't want to be seen as a black female artist or a woman artist or a black artist, or I'm just trying to write or act or do whatever I'm doing. But then talking with Neda, I had remembered when I was a bit younger and when I actually had embraced the notion of these labels, and then we were talking about how there are people who can take a kind of power from that label rather than seeing it as something that you don't want it to be a part of who you are or the part of how you're seen, that perhaps there might be power that one draws from being in a marginal position. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more about what you were saying in that conversation because I thought it was quite interesting.
Well, just, excuse me, last week we were at Bob Wilson and there was a performance by Croatian artist who is very young and very disabled. It was a great performance, and we had dinner later and we had conversation, and I had conversation with her, and she said to me that she's very upset with people in Croatia or other places because they always treat her as a disabled artist. And she loved being at Bob's because she was there as an artist, not because she's disabled. And I came home and I really thought about the subject matter because I, as a woman, cannot ignore my sensibilities as a collector. I'm not an artist, and I understand that here we're looking at two beautiful sculptures of Toni. They have, they're great, but they have, for me, a female, again, little sensibility that it's a home. It's a delicate question because I believe that why ignore our sensibility as a woman? And yet that hurt women artists because certainly the art world treats them different. It does. Their art is not on the same level sometimes, price-wise only price-wise, as men. And I think it's really, it's probably changing a bit, but I personally like the sensibility of a female artist, which makes it just as important as, any man artist, but we are females, and so for me, I go with that.
Yeah. How about you guys? How do you feel about that? That label, is it something that you are comfortable with, as taking on as a woman artist, or do you see it as something other? How do you respond to what Neda is saying?
I relate. I hated being thought of as a woman artist when I was in school, and I didn't go to graduate school. I just went to New York, but I just didn't want to be perceived as, I just wanted to be seen as an artist, period. I just didn't like the moniker, and I didn't like the implied difference, and I kind of rode that horse for quite a while, and I had a show, I think it was in the early 90s, mid-90s or something like that, and I had done a series of drawings. I think this is sort of a funny story. I'd done the series of drawings. I'd done a picture that had a waterway in it, and it was this real skinny, sort of river that ran right straight up the middle of the picture. And I was thinking of it as this kind of odd path that it was too small for a river, but it was too watery to be a real path, but it was a kind of a path, and it led straight back. And I was kind of fascinated by the dumb but beautiful symmetry that it had. And I did that, it was in 1993. And then a couple of years later, I thought, why didn't I pursue that image? I like that image. And I don't really work serially. In other words, I wouldn't take a picture and then make a variation on it and then make another variation on it. But I thought, I can use my imagination here. I'm just going to follow this waterway. I'm going to go to the end, and I'm going to see the landscape it ends up in on the other side of it. So I ended up doing this series of drawings that had this waterway running through, and they got very, very different one from the other. And I showed them at a show in the mid-90s, and this guy came up to me and said, I like these pictures, but they are so vaginal. I hesitate to buy one because they're so female, and I was in a slight huff about it, it's just a water path, you don't have to get all vaginal on me about it. And I started talking to my shrink at the time about it, and I was like, how come there's no word like phallic? When you say phallic about men's art or imagery or something, and it sounds kind of like her, yeah, phallic. And I was like, how come there's no image when you say vaginal? It's like you're on the doctor's table or something like that getting an exam. How come there's no, and then somebody said yonic, and I was like, oh no, that's not going to do it. And I was really bothered by it, and we kept talking about this. And at one point she said, You just have to think about it as a whole different thing. It's just a whole different sensibility. It doesn't matter if there is a word or not, but the important thing, we concluded, is that there is this sensibility that's different. And it's funny because when I first started doing landscapes, there was one that I remember doing that had a moon in it, and an artist named June Leaf, who is married to Robert Frank. She's really a pretty amazing person. Do you know her?
Yes,
She's a
absolutely.
fascinating person. And she was one of the first people that saw the very first landscapes I ever did. And she looked at the moon and she went, that's your, and I'm not going to say the word, but she used an expletive for female organ. And she said, I love that little moon. I love that. That's so, and I was like, June? I was slightly shocked by her language and her boldness, but it came back to me when I was thinking about all this stuff, and then I did this big about face and started thinking, you know what? I have a different body from a man. I'm taking the world in a different way. I see the world differently. I'm built differently. Men penetrate, women take in. There's a real, I think that there's an actual difference. And and my shrink actually gave me an article that another psychologist had written that was all about that. And I can't remember the woman's name, but it was a very smart article. And it just made me think, like, well, society has not caught up to any of this kind of acceptance, I don't think, quite yet. And I don't know if, like, the Beyonce direction is the right way to go, or the radical feminist, Bulldog thing is the way to. I don't know what's the right way to go to get there. I think we just have to go through all sorts of different pathways, but I think that that's the intended trajectory, is to find out what makes a strong woman's expression strong and accept that as like a different thing, because I do think it is a different thing at this point.
It's going to happen as we continue to be. We're really the first generation who's thought about it, because the people before us have done work that has no gender. If it's conceptual, if you're Agnes Martin, it's not very far removed from Robert Ryman's. You're dealing with a kind of a dialogue that is it's not about gender, and it's much easier for an audience to absorb in that sense, I think, But I feel I don't know too many women who've been what I'll call midwives of our image bank. That's maybe we should have appropriated the target because it looks like it has a destination point, and that was not actual. But I don't know, I can't name too many people. That's the sad part. I can't, and I never could. They say, who or what did you look at? I had to go back into very early, I had to go back almost to Paleolithic art, to very early art, to find symbols that represented the Great Mother, the Earth Mother, goddess culture, the female body that wasn't anorexic, They don't have anorexia.
One thing that occurs to me is that I think maybe, especially for younger women artists, and a emerging point you guys are saying here, that getting rid of the label of woman, or whatever that kind of marginal label might be a way of kind of trying to grab onto this kind of market power or whatever. It's so maybe you're seeing yourself as not having this power, and if I wasn't seen as a woman artist, I would fetch the price I'm meant to get. I would be in the gallery I think I'm meant to be in, and everything like that, and might unconsciously be making artists more. Is there any chance that it might represent a kind of coziness or an attraction to a kind of power that you're saying that people should maybe avoid? And I'm just wondering about your experience, especially Neda, because I remember you talking about when you had changed around the paintings in your front room, and there's a way in which this kind of a marginal identity, being a woman, being an artist of color, anything like that, connects you very viscerally to the dispossessed. And I think that maybe sometimes when we reject that label, we might also be rejecting our line to the dispossessed, our line to having conversation that goes outside a conversation of just the powerful. But talk to me about that story you told me. I thought was so interesting.
I agree, and I think there's many. Personally, when I look at some of the artists that I have and they're female, I react to them differently because I connect to some things that I see in their work. But I also think, just to say what you had said before, why women didn't, they're not in the same place financially. I think women painted for themselves or made sculptures for themselves. I think men, by nature, I shouldn't now say that, but I think they're more aggressive. Power is important to them much more. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but... And I think that they just, women that I know in my life collect the sculpture artists, painters. They paint because they are artists, because they love it. They don't think of where is it going to go. They hope and whatever, I think. That's one thing. Second thing, I think that also the whole support system in media and curators and museums, it just was going someplace. Like, I think 2 years ago when wasn't Kiefer being interviewed and he made a comment that women cannot paint. That only happened 2 years ago, and that's the stupidest thing. I mean, he's an idiot. I mean, sorry, that guy is, but these things happen. So I prefer than to say, yeah, I am a woman. This is my painting, because why negate something that is good and it's coming from me? I mean, I don't, but from April. But you're a painter. I just receive it like that.
I am a painter, but Neda is wonderful because she's not just a collector that buys things. She meets artists, she talks to artists, she knows about art, she thinks about art, she lives and breathes art. You really are a remarkable person, Neda. Seriously. But well, first of all, I just want to say I wasn't in the car talking about Woody Allen, but I don't like to liken myself to Woody Allen. He was funny at the beginning, but it's kind of, but that said, when I first started trying to get the work out there, I wanted everybody to like it. I wanted everybody to buy it, but I kind of don't. I mean, I know a lot of male artists that paint what they want to paint, and the art market be damned. It's that we don't have a special credibility for being true to ourselves, but there is. I mean, it's easier to be accepted, I think, still even now as a male artist. I think the stats are that women still make less in spite of their long careers. Susan Rothenberg, who's a very long-standing, very great artist, I've noted that she doesn't make as much money as a lot of other male painters. Go ahead.
Sorry, but I think if we go in history, Claudine Colodel with Rodin, John Mitchell, we have so many artists that were really representational, but they just didn't get anywhere as much as, why should de Kooning be 5 times more valuable than John Mitchell? I mean, that was always for me a question.
For me, this is so irrelevant. It seems so important now. What is the world going to look back on in 50 years and 100 years? So many of the things that had big money years ago, you can't get rid of today. So this is not a value. It is more fun to have more money, maybe. I'm not sure anymore. But this is not the measure of success.
You're right, except MoMA didn't have Cindy Sherman in their collection or Guggenheim until a few years ago, or a first show at MoMA for Louise Lower or Cindy or any. I guess I'm talking more about that.
Well, this
it's
is
not
interesting too, because that's a very good case in point. There's a museum that is looking to find itself in the 21st century. It's looking to redefine itself, and it has ideas that about modernism and what it means that need to be reassessed. The Whitney has moved downtown and opened up its space, and it seems to have been able to take a breath. And there's been a lot of women in their opening show that they brought back a lot. I thought it was a great, open, questioning, inquiring exhibition. I think MoMA needs to do that. I think it's even bigger than the women issue. But of course, women aren't, they weren't the currency, and it was not only the female, the people in power, the men wanted the men and the women wanted the men. You had that issue also, that the art world was very gay at a time when gays were not able to have the kind of wonderful openness there, and that was another issue that was huge. And that came out in the film Who Gets to Call It Art. So there have been big reasons, and MoMA, that's been part of their issue. I mean, this is a very straightforward thought, but
that's all true. It's true, but
That's why I say it.
that for me, I find it upsetting that it took them how many years to realize that a woman is, this art is just as good as anything else that they had. I mean, that's a problem. Same with the black artists. I mean, but we're not going to go there now. But right?
How many battles can you fight? At once.
I would like to go there for 1 second, because did you all see the Kerry James Marshall show at the Met Breuer?
Yes.
Oh my God, one of the best shows I have ever seen in my life. And just galvanizing, groundbreaking, amazing. And why didn't I know his work in the 80s? Because he was black. It was strictly racist bullshit. And it's so shocking. I mean, Eric and I walked through that show going like, what? How is it possible that this work wasn't given the same wall space? It was outrageous. So we're all still working it out here. It's not just, it's women, it's people of color, and it's just, we have such a huge diversity problem in the world. And I've been doing this long enough that like now when I try to catch up to who I'm supposed to be interested in the art world, it's like there's this Indian person and there's this person from Singapore and all the Chinese artists, and I'm like, I can't take it anymore. There's like too many people to catch up with, but they all deserve it, and if I had an extra life where I could clone myself, I think I'd just spend all my time trying to catch up with everybody that merits it.
And I wonder how that does link back to what you were talking about with the beauty and irony and these different kinds of shifting modalities that we've entered into in art. And I know one thing that you had mentioned before is, it's, you were saying jokingly, maybe we take a break from irony because if 1 out of 5 children don't have dinner to eat, maybe it's not so important to make your ironic joke that we can put a hold on that for the next 2 years. And I wonder if... Do you think it's possible that there's certain artists, a number of them in a more marginal class, either of color or women or whatever, who didn't have a voice, particularly at times when irony was the kind of the thing that was most important aesthetically? I mean, if there's something that's much more direct about your work, something that's more focused on like just the beautiful and the representation there, and doesn't have kind of a wink to it because you don't have anything. You're not really winking about anything in your life, that maybe that just kind of put them out of step, out of style in the times of like the 80s and 90s. When
yeah, very
was
possibly. But irony has been the style for so long now. I mean, it's really going on and on. It was part and part of conceptual art, and it's just like kind of continued. So I'm not sure where to draw the irony line, like when it wasn't more or less important. I mean, certainly in my art lifetime, it's been the sort of the prevailing thing. And I think that for me, there's a really big difference between high irony and low irony. I think a lot of one-liner art, as I look at it, you have like some visual pun or something like that, or some remark about society or whatever that's ironic. a lot of that stuff is, to me, low irony. But I think that all great art has high irony, because it's all about the things that we've been talking about, the work that contains both life and death and decay and vibrancy and the quick and the dead. It's what is always deeply in art that's important, and I think that that's usually why art survives. And low ironic art, I don't particularly expect to survive into many centuries to come, unless reality TV and the world that we seem to be stuck in at the moment really overpowers us all, and that's all we're left with. How's that for a dark vision?
Well, on that note, because I just always like to leave people on a high note. That's what they call it, Max High Note Maduka. I think we should open this up to some questions and answers. Or maybe more questions and answers.
Hi, I'm Matko Tomic. I'll bring your mic in the back. I'm also the executive director here, and I welcome you here, but I needed to clarify a couple of things, because it's odd that you mentioned Henry Geltzeller. It's going to be 21 days that he died in 2 days from now, and I was his assistant before he passed away, and also I worked on that movie with Peter. So before he died, Henry did make a correction. He said that in that show you're referring to 1940, 1970 New York School Sculpture and Painting, he would have included 2 women only.
Only 2.
Only 2. I won't tell you who. You can go to the Yale. You can go to the Yale University archives. There, his papers are there. You can.
Yeah,
It's online. It's online. You can find it. And
he's trolling this conversation.
Peter Rosen, he just really focused that movie on that moment in American history. So that's why there were no women there. In that movie. Sir,
That's not going to work very long.
So, thank you so much for this really fascinating discussion. I'm Claude Granitsky. I'm the new president over at the Watermill Center, and I was thank you. I'm glad, Neda, that you mentioned Vesna Matkovic, the Croatian artist who didn't necessarily want to be referred to as a female artist or as an artist with disabilities, but just as an artist. And I think her work really resonated. But my question is actually more specific to the next generation of artists who are emerging, people of maybe Vesna's generation. As we have more women in leadership roles now in the art world, whether it's, I guess, Brooklyn Museum or Studio Museum or a new museum, or even this year's Venice Biennale, for instance, what advice would you give this new generation of female artists who are trying to rise in this art world, which is still very male-dominated, but still we're seeing some shifts where women are in more leadership roles? And because I'm saying that because you use the word pioneer. Michele used the word pioneer, but this is a question for Neda and Michele specifically.
I personally think that every artist should just do their work, and if they say I am a female or disabled, whatever, but do your work, and I think they do that. You produce work as an artist, and if somebody reads it as a feminine, that's fine. That's just how I feel.
I think we're in a very good moment in terms of may the best man win, even if it happens to be a woman. Because I think there are more and more women in shows, more and more women are in positions of curatorship and authority, and they don't seem to have the old attitudes. It's all moving forward very positively, and I think everything takes time. All revolutions take time, but make no bones about it, as they say, it is a revolution, and revolutions always need their Madame Defarge. They need sacrificial lambs. They need all the kind of wonderful rhetoric that the Guerrilla Girls managed to do. I think they were really the great Amazons of our times in the Grecian mythological way. And I tend to see things through the eyes of mythology. It's always wonderful because you don't personalize. You're lifted up into the greater history of the world. And that tells me we're in a wonderful moment, and that I can continue to work, April can continue to paint, and everything's going to be all right for our daughters, granddaughters, nieces. It's happening. Don't you feel that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's different. Although I think you have to go back preceding the Greek mythology to get to not a patrilineal mythological structure.
It's
but
true.
The white goddess,
Yes,
something like
love
that.
Hi, I just want to say, I want to give a shout out to a friend of mine who was a female gallerist in the 80s and one of the first to show women, Manny Johnson, Louise
yes,
Lawler,
she's
Susan
great.
Rothenberg,
Yes.
Sherrie Levine. She gave them some of their first shows. So I think sometimes it takes a female gallerist to actually relate and do that. She took over a gallery from her parents, and she completely started paying attention to all these women in the 80s. And I think historically she deserves a place in history for women in art.
Betty Parsons also.
Yes, exactly. Betty Parsons.
And Neda, would you say that, like, do you feel that that it's important also to be encouraging new, like, women collectors, and how does that come into this?
Yeah, of course, I think, but, what Christy said is fine, but that's, how many years ago? 50 years ago? I mean, I'm sorry, I just look at it different. I think that it's too long, and I just, anyway, sorry, tell me again what you asked.
No.
So
You're impatient for a better world. It's the best.
I do think that, and I have friends, directors of museum, female directors, who are having a lot of problem and feel very unjust. And how much it's still controlled. Unfortunately, art world is controlled today a lot by finances of collectors and board members, which I think is a really big problem today, because they end up influencing curators and the museum people of many things that take place. So I think the curator's job is to know the best artist, man or a woman, and just put them there. Nothing to do with anything else. That's my...
Hi, I'm just a private citizen and an art collector, and some of what I want to say is not meant to be snobbish. But for whatever reason, in my art collection, started out when I guess I was overseas. I started with Rosa Bonheur, which some of you may know from the Metropolitan Museum of Art with her Horse Fair. Wound up with Louise Nevelson, Marisol, Judy Glansman, which I want to just anecdotally say, which to get to my point. When I was in the East Village, I looked at this work of art and I said, "Who's this guy that did this painting?" And then they said, "Oh, it's a woman." I also have Joan Snyder in the collection, and probably what has really sort of hit my heart is another what would be considered outsider art, and I collect ceramic sculptures. So Ken Price has played a major force in my collection, where you just can't put your finger on what it is, which is sort of what I like about art. So I think, with all the inherent problems that you're mentioning in terms of misogynist society, and maybe because I'm gay, I sort of also feel like an outsider and have never been pigeonholed. I think if somebody put on an exhibition of just art without labels and just sort of said, guess, is it a man, is it a woman? What does it really matter? Is it good art? And does it move you? That might help in some way. I don't know whether it's ever been done before, but again, I don't usually go around looking, is this a man, is it a woman, but just, is this something that speaks to me? And maybe, I don't know, maybe some of these artists in my collection appeal to a feminine sensibility. I don't know. I think I'm pretty male in a lot of ways. But it's again, I think this need for us to label things all the time, which I think a lot of artists, male or female, don't necessarily like labels.
I'm sorry, I don't think we're talking about labeling. I think we're talking about unjust. I think nobody labels anybody. I just heard that Aspen Museum had the best female artist show ever. I just think we need to put as many women artists out there as men. So that's the only thing. I don't think anybody labels any. We go to show, you look at art, but there is no, like we said, Cindy Sherman or April Eno. Why they are not out there in the museums? Only recently they are trying to do it, and I think it's taking too long and in a very slow space.
When MoMA opened, thank you. When MoMA opened after their big renovation, and I went to see, and it was astonishing because in their whole entire floor, maybe it was 2 floors of their collection, there were 2 female artists.
Yeah, plus ça change. That was really annoying.
It was Louise Bourgeois and yeah. And so I stormed into the office and started saying, where are the women? And started listing all of the women who I think should have been there and included. But it is too long in coming. I agree with you. It's much too long. And if you go to see the Green River Cemetery, you walk in to see the Jackson Pollock grave, and then there's this little stone at his feet for Lee Krasner. Isn't it wonderful? So that, to me, is symbolic of really what has to change. And I totally thank you so much. I agree with you.
Right.
But to your point, the gay collector who has lots of women, you're just bragging, I think. No, just kidding. There's one thing that I've noticed. Pardon? Very phallic. Good for you. One thing I've noticed is that like when I talk to young artists, they're really, really concerned about their artist statements. Like they work and work and work on them. And it's almost like it feels like all artists now have to pitch themselves harder. Like they're all doing their own PR and they've got to get the really best websites and they have to be social networking up the wazoo because otherwise they're never going to get anywhere. And it's so much pressure. And just that thing to me of like, it's not the work, it's like how you pitch it that's going to get you where you're going to go. It feels to me like an enduring problem, a currently enduring problem. And I really worry about. That's for everybody, men and women.
It's like you bring this like sort of elevator pitch, like almost Shark Tank sort of sensibility into the.
Exactly, it's like it's like business. It, it's
what
endless.
are our roots? Where did artists come from? Back to Lascaux. I was actually in the Lascaux of Italy, in a little island off the coast of Sicily last year. I had to crawl in on my belly. And I saw both Paleolithic and Neolithic images. And you realize we came out of shamanism. We were the ones who could visualize the collective hopes and dreams of the clan, of the tribe. The one, Barnett Newman, I love what he said. What is an artist? He said the first man was an artist. He took his stick in the sand. It's our endowment, it's our birthright. We have to, like food is too, and food is a business. But at what point do we understand our great philosopher Martin Buber? How much is our I-thou dialogue? And then you have to kill to eat. So how much I-it dialogue do you need? The art world needs to recalibrate. It needs to expand the I-thou dialogue. I think men are just as capable of doing that as women. I don't see that as a woman's role. But I think as that happens, we're living in a context where women in all fields are moving forward. Women are educated, they're literate today. It's a changing world. So it's a social issue. We have to, as a society, come back to refine our cosmic dialogue. So women in the art world is a part of a greater whole that I think is going through an enormous shift. And I think we're lucky to be sitting here and contemplating it in the greater scheme of things. I think men are just as, I think men really have as big a struggle today, ironically, with the market and all these things as women. It's not even a woman's issue anymore.
On this note, do we have any other question from the audience? I think that you should keep that question for the August 26th, our second talks in the series, and the third one will be on September 23rd. We hope for the great weather like today, and we invite you to walk the grounds and see the sculpture, and then thank you to the panelists.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for doing this. This was really inspiring, and I'm deeply touched that you're all here. And I would like to say that I'm grateful that it rained because my pieces look much better wet. So it all worked out. Thank you so much.